So in the last episode, we talked about, Anakin's arc of becoming Darth Vader and becoming this character who sort of gives up his agency and is just reacting out of fear and just sort of wearing the shell and pursuing this single-minded, problems, right? We talked about how to not turn into that. So in this one, I want to talk about more from the other side, like, yeah, what would it be like to have Vader on your team? What would it be like to have disruptive, toxic people in your leadership structure? What are some best practices around navigating that situation? How do you deal with the fact that there probably will be somebody that was promoted beyond their skill set or their leadership capabilities, or somebody that is inherently all about themselves or all about protecting their resources? Like, what do you do? Like, what are some leadership tactics or some navigating the team tactics when you have that person as a teammate or as a leader?
So, one thing I asked a great mentor about this at one point, and his feedback was that you have to, as much as this is going to be painful, you have to get closer to that person because that's going to rub probably against your grain of how you want to do things because that person probably doesn't have the same values that we have. That person's probably not trying to become a magnanimous leader at this
Mm-hmm.
point in their life. But there's multiple benefits that I've learned from taking this approach of going, I have to lean into my pain of being closer to that person, even though they're going to do things that I'm like, I don't want to be a part of that. You don't have to take part in those things, but just to be closer to them, sit next to them at lunch, try to understand them a little bit better, ask them to go out after work, whatever it takes in order to and this is kind of the more easy magnanimous viewpoint, is that person is acting like a Darth Vader for a reason, right? We just went and talked about Anakin's backstory. They probably have a backstory. They probably don't want to be this person, but they don't feel like they have a lot of choices at this point in their life. They've made their bed and now they're lying in it. So there's a reason. There's childhood trauma. There's whatever, right? There's family issues at home. There's something that is leading
There's
this
I got passed
person.
over for promotion, and so now I'm going to make sure I get the next one. Yeah. So that's true that there's an opportunity to be sympathetic there, right? To not view them as black and white, but to try to get a little bit more nuance in your understanding of this person that's going to be in your orbit. So you might as well figure it out.
Yeah, and then there's a strategy element too, right? The strategy element is I want to understand what is this person on about. Darth
Right.
Vader is all about resources. He's all about making sure he has top-down control of or at least like a great level of influence over the right resources in the organization. And he's
Right.
all about capturing the resources that he needs to accomplish his mission. So a lot of times, what is that person on about? Are they on about resources? Because if they're on about resources, just because you're empathetic and try to understand their backstory doesn't mean you can change them. That's not your job. You can maybe help, but we can't. That requires a lot of time and energy and a skillful person, right time and place. So you can try, but you can definitely take advantage of understanding what is their strategy. What is this person trying to do? And can I use my being a little bit closer to them to align their strategy with the overall team strategy? Can I try to get them just a little bit closer to it? That way, when they go off and respond to things, react to things, they're at least reacting in the right direction. Hopefully, they might still not be being the kindest person to the people around them or whatever, but at least they're focused on the mission that the rest of the people are
Right.
focused on, so you can
So
forgive it a little bit.
right. Can you channel that energy? Can you blunt the trauma that they're inflicting on people around them, or can you get them to point all their horsepower at something that is slightly better aligned? So if you get close to them, you can. If you're a peer, or if you're somebody that you get to a position where you can they trust and they understand your worldview, maybe you can kind of point them a little bit slightly on a course correction, right? The other experience I've had with that, I think very similarly, is that if you're in more of a subordinate role where you're maybe not going to necessarily be able to guide them, but you're not super well aligned with the mission, selfishly but not cynically, if you can satisfy them occasionally, if you can make them look good because that's what they value, if you can find a way to do a thing that you like doing anyway or that you feel is the right thing to do that they also value, if you can find some piece of alignment that every once in a while, like you're making them look good, or you're satisfying them, or you're helping them move in their direction, then you can earn some air cover to like go off and do the things that you think are actually important, or go off and pursue missions that maybe they aren't necessarily explicitly asking for. And I've had that experience too, right? I've had times where I was pursuing some things that I thought were really important to move the organization forward, but they weren't super high priority for my next level boss or the one above that. But as long as that person, every quarter they'd call me like, oh my God, we need to make a dashboard for this, or I need a report on this, or I need a strategy, a slide deck about this thing or whatever. As long as I was willing to do that, like drop everything and spend the next 3 days doing that thing and putting them in a position to succeed, then they were like, okay, great. I'll trust you to spend your other time doing whatever you think is important. Like, you can kind of earn yourself some grace to not be, on the Darth Vader train all the time, but at least, let Darth Vader empower you enough to like go have your own influence in the organization. And I think it's not guaranteed, but if you, like you say, you get close enough to somebody to understand what's important to them, and you listen to them when they say, this is what is non-negotiable, this is the thing that has to be done in the organization, then you could potentially not only not get flamed yourself, but earn yourself a little bit of credit to, pursue your own agenda, or to, kind of cultivate a different network that's not just the strict hierarchy. And that's a workaround, right? But that actually takes us to the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is kind of organizational alignment itself. Telling the difference between an organization where it's like grooming Darth Vaders, like the whole organization has a different set of priorities and behaviors and missions than what you believe in. That's one situation, which is a different situation from, I'm fundamentally on with this organization, but I have this one really terrible, toxic, disruptive boss in my orbit. Like, those are kind of different environments. So what have you had either of those or both of those situations, Drew?
Yeah, I've definitely seen both of those. I haven't experienced them. I've experienced some of them directly, some of them indirectly. But yeah, I think there's two different situations there, like you said. And that's actually the exact same point I was about to make, which is understanding if it's a bad apple factory or not. Like you said, if it's an individual manager who has gotten themselves to this point and they're just a driver, a go-getter, and they have kind of run out of road in terms of their skill set to be able to do that, they're not able to properly leverage the actual team and organization to do it, and so they end up being the Vader. That's a situation where it's a little more manageable. Like you said, you can deal with that. You can work through that. You
it's
can
a temporary
be very
situation.
tactical.
You can work around it. Yeah, you can imagine that that's not your destiny. Is that that's the only way to succeed? You just need to kind of work around that person, and maybe look for another team, look for an opportunity to transfer, or figure out how to work with them until they go do something else, and you have a new boss.
Yeah, you can get those people working in the right direction. At some point, if it's one person or a few people that are a minority, then you can generally work with other good leaders in the organization to get them going in the right direction. Let's just keep them focused on the things that are important to the organization, reward them when they do them, and sure. We're not gonna. There might be rough around the edges in terms of how they treat people and stuff, but we can't get. If we can't get rid of them, what are we doing? Let's just try to help them as much as we can, and make sure that the rest of the organization is treated as good as possible. Now, the other side of that is if it's a bad apple factory, if the CEO is doing this and you see the CEO is doing it, the person underneath the CEO, the VPs, are three of them didn't used to do it, but now they're starting to act like this, and then your boss is acting like this or whatever. Okay, that's a bad apple factory. You can't fix a bad apple factory. You have to, at that point, you got to be Finn. You got to leave the stormtroopers. You got to leave the Empire, because that bad apple factory is not your responsibility to fix, nor are you probably at the right place in time. Yeah.
Call out to episode 7. I love it. So yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, if if you're 3 levels down in an organization, and the way they make decisions about promotions, the way they make decisions about resources, the way they make decisions about who gets to have authority and influence is fundamentally not aligned with the career you want to have, right, then probably hanging out waiting to work for a different Darth Vader than the one that you're currently working for isn't the plan, right? Like maybe you just don't want to be a stormtrooper anymore, right? And that's a really hard thing. And we're not here at Wonder Tour telling you to go quit your job tomorrow, but we are telling you to examine your values. We're telling you to develop your own character and make your own decisions about where you're going with it. There are stories of organizations that have developed really toxic decision-making cultures, really toxic leadership cultures, right? And whether it's, if you realize that your whole organization is a Ponzi scheme, or if you realize your whole organization is a cigarette manufacturer, and you just fundamentally can't stomach the product that is being produced, like, nobody's going to solve that problem for you, right? You're the only one that can decide, how well aligned you are. And trying to tell the difference between those two situations, more often than not, it's going to be, you have a single person in your orbit that's really disruptive. You're working for a boss that you're really not aligned with. That's really hard. It's really difficult, especially if they're enabled by other people, if you don't feel like you're empowered to make a difference. Like, not to take anything away from that situation, but it's important to try to discern the difference between that situation and this is the way this organization wants people to behave and I don't feel comfortable with it. Then you might need to look for another gig.
Exactly. That's good.